watching the buffer for YouTube. So thank you so much, everyone who is trickling in to spend your Thursday afternoon if you're on the East Coast with us, or morning if you are in the Western United States. Just thank you so much for being here. This is the fourth and second to last day for the Dismantle Preservation Unconference this year. The goal of Dismantle Preservation is really to amplify historically excluded stories and narratives. And this year, it's been a real delight to showcase majority student and recent graduate speakers and a lot of grassroots activists as well. These are wonderful people who are making an impact on the field of cultural resources who may not typically get to speak at a traditional preservation conference. And if you've been tuning in this week, I'm sure you've been blown away by the work just as I have been. And it has been a real great breath of fresh air and incredibly motivational as well. So thank you for attending this free event. It's free thanks to the support of the Alpha Wood Foundation, Museum Hack, and Eileen and Norman Tyler. Thank you for being here. And we're gonna have two back-to-back presentations followed by a Q&A. So as you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or use the little Q&A box. And I also encourage you, if you have any great takeaways throughout the entire event, share them on social media using hashtag #DismantlePreservation and let the world know what you learned so that we can all collectively learn together how we can make a better cultural resource movement. We're going to start with Deanna, and then we will move on to Nyla. So Deanna, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. Let me begin my presentation real quick. Here we go. I'm presenting, by the way, I'm Diana Hernandez. I'm a MS candidate in historic preservation at the University of Texas at Austin. And I'm presenting Las Voces de San José, lifting Latinx narratives of placemaking through cemetery preservation. So the Reclaiming Memories Research Lab is an interdisciplinary team of graduate students, recent graduates, and professionals based out of UT, working together to reclaim memories of Black, Indigenous, and people of color and marginalized communities. Research aspires to collectively restore missing and forgotten histories, as well as advocate for the historic preservation of communities, sacred spaces, and BIPOC sites of significance. In this presentation, Reclaiming Memories Research Lab will highlight the histories of some of Cementerio San José's inhabitants. We will also showcase an excerpt from one of the oral histories that the team has conducted of a descendant. We hope that this presentation can shed light on the importance of oral histories in documenting the narratives of historically excluded communities. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the location of San Jose 1 and 2 in the Montopolis area of Austin, Texas, just to give some context. So in order to understand San Jose, it's important to understand the history of the area. San Jose 1 was founded in 1919 by the Unión Fraternal Mexicana, which was a, I forgot the name, but it was a society that lent assistance to the Mexican migrant sharecroppers in the area. And basically they, because of the need of the community, started the cemetery. And then in 1949, San Jose 2 was started because San Jose 1 was full. And like I mentioned, this was an area that was largely comprised of Mexican sharecroppers and African-American sharecroppers as well. So due to a lack of archival records, part of the recovery process was conducting oral histories. This was instrumental in our understanding of the history of the community and of the cemetery. To the right is Mr. Clifton Griffin, who is a longtime member of the Montopolis community and was able to give us great insight into the founding of the cemetery. of San Jose 1. And now I'm going to show you all a quick clip of some of the oral histories that we've conducted. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit to 20, right here. Oops.
There's two different cemeteries that people call it San Jose. Are you talking about the one on Apahoki Lane, or are you talking about the one on Metropolis Drive?
Both. I'm researching both.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Because the one that's Apahoki Lane, I do have a great grandfather that was buried in there.
Oh, wow.
And I think there's a, that actually, I believe that was really the first cemetery here in Metropolis.
The one on Metropolis?
I'm not sure.
Yes.
Yeah, well, see, the one on Metropolis, people had to pay to get buried there.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened was, my great-grandfather and 3 other guys here from Metropolis, they got together and they bought this land over there from that cemetery because they wanted to have a cemetery to where if you didn't have any money, that you could be buried there. In other words, they weren't going to charge nobody to get buried there.
So your
In other words, it was more of a less of a community type of for the families and stuff, for the first settlers of Metropolis. Because the one on Metropolis Drive, you had to pay to get buried there. So what these guys did, Mr. Fabian, Mr. Ojeda, Mr. Ruedas, and my great grandfather, Celso Monreal, them 4 got together and purchased this land, arranged, for buying that property for the community. And if somebody died and they couldn't afford to get buried, you could get buried there. It was for the community. It was for the people that moved here from the Southwest, because they didn't want to have the people buried in some pauper's grave somewhere where nobody was going to be forgotten. They wanted a cemetery of their own. That's why, because we do have cousins or relatives of cousins that have been buried at the one on Metropolis Drive. As a matter of fact, my sister was telling me that the person that they named me after, Francisco Monreal, that he's buried there, but I've never been able to find his grave there. But the people that own the church that's next door to it, they're Latinx, they are cousins of mine. Their grandfather and my grandfather were brothers. And they're the ones that are taking care of the cemetery, cutting the grass and doing the maintenance on it. The church is next door. They're the ones that are doing the maintenance and the upkeep of that cemetery. The one on the top of the drive.
The church to the left or the right?
The church on the left is at the corner of Richardson and Metropolis.
Okay. So they're the ones who maintain it. Okay.
Yeah, they're related to me. They're cousins or second cousins. Their grandfather and my grandfather were brothers.
Oh, okay.
And that's the way our family started here in Montalpis. My grandfather and his brother came here from Mexico in the 1920s, late 20s and 30s. And they settled here in Montalpis. As a matter of fact, the street that I grew up on, and my parents, we own 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 properties on that street. It's called Torres Street. It was named after my grandfather.
Oh, okay.
It was named after my grandfather and his brother, Torres, which is on my mom's side.
Now, was there like a funeral home that y'all would go to for burials? Was there a specific one, or would just kind of people would just?
There was none. Back then, no, they just would go to the coroner's office and then they would just bring them to the church.
Oh, to Dolores?
I don't recall. I mean, back the only funeral home that I remember was Mission Funeral Home on Cesar Chavez. Because when I was in Catholic school, I was an altar boy at Dolores Church, and I remember the priest always used to come to our classroom and say, Frank and Joe, come with me, and he would pull us out of our classroom so that we would help him for a funeral. I mean, when I was a kid, I went to probably 100 funerals.
Oh my gosh! And so they were all.
I went to a lot of funerals.
And it was always through Dolores Church.
What's that?
The funerals were always through Dolores Church.
Always at Dolores Church, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I remember a lot of them, man. It's real weird because I still remember a lot of those funerals.
Okay. So we are still working with the community to document more oral histories. And that's just kind of the beginning of a series of oral histories that we're putting together, which we will donate to the Austin History Center. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanna. Really appreciate it. Nyla, we're ready for you.
Oops, sorry, couldn't find my screen. Here it is. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this virtual unconference. And before I start my presentation, I just want to give a little land acknowledgement. And 1 minute. Okay. So I am speaking to you all from Lenape-Hoquink, the traditional lands of the Lenni Lenape people. And in this land acknowledgement, I wanted to bring more awareness to the violent history of American Indian boarding schools and, present a trigger warning for any audience members indigenous to North America. These schools were set up to, quote, kill the Indian, save the man. Please don't worry about reading the small text in the image on this slide, but if you want to see the full image and learn more about American Indian boarding schools, you can visit boardingschoolhealing.org. I only recently learned about boarding schools myself, and I came across a video on social media of a Native American person talking about the mass grave sites recently found in Canada. In this video, they said, "What kind of school do you enter but never leave?" And that phrasing really made the issue sink in for me. So I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to the fact that 73 of these schools in the US remain open and 15 of them are still boarding. Again, that is boardingschoolhealing.org as one resource to learn more. And now I will begin my presentation. My presentation is titled Applying Systems Thinking to Special Collections, a case study at the University of Delaware Manuscript and Special Collections. First, let me provide some context for the project. I'm a graduate fellow at the Winchester University of Delaware Program in Art Conservation, who's specializing in object conservation with a minor in library and archives conservation. And part of my coursework included treating part of the David Fox Nelson scrapbook collection from the UD manuscripts and special collections. One of the scrapbooks is pictured here. And this treatment project is how I began working with the UD special collections. However, this presentation does not focus on the scrapbook treatment itself. So if you'd like to learn more about that, you can visit my portfolio. The link is on the screen. And also there should be a link to my portfolio in the sort of information about all of the conference presentations if you would like to know more about the scrapbook treatment. So another part of my coursework included a spring semester independent study. My fall semester was centered around communication in mid-sized museums, and I wanted to continue that theme of institutional communication in the spring. My library and archives supervisor and I came up with the idea to track the life cycle, as we called it, of scrapbooks through the UD special collection from acquisition to conservation. This would serve as a case study for how items flow through the collection. And in the process of tracking this life cycle, I would identify potential areas for improvement as they relate to communication and streamlining the cycle of collection items. So we scheduled video call interviews with relevant faculty and staff where I asked them a similar set of questions, and I tried to get the best sense of how, when, and why objects move from one department to another. After the interviews were finished, I reviewed and consolidated my notes in order to produce an infographic about the cycle of objects in the collection. This step in the project is where the application of systems thinking comes in. I wanted to present the special collections as a system and think about the objects as what flows through said system. From my notes, I identified all of the stages an object would go through, and I represented them as rectangles. I then color-coded these rectangles to represent stages like acquisition I color-coded these rectangles to represent required stages like acquisition and optional stages like conservation and public-facing stages like exhibition and outreach. I then spatially arranged the rectangles and added arrows to represent the flow of the object from one stage to another. Double arrows would indicate the possibility of an object going back and forth between stages. And it was during this step that I realized I had to focus on the ideal flow of the collection item and not the real flow in some cases, because there would be too many arrows and then the infographic would be more confusing than helpful. Lastly, I color-coded the arrows as well to represent a flow from one stage to another that may only happen upon request or if necessary. For example, an object would only be put on exhibition upon request and only be sent to conservation if it was in need of conservation. This is the final product. As you can see, the key is in the lower left-hand corner. I also made a write-up for each stage of the system and pointed out successes, issues affecting other stages, and opportunities for improvement at each stage. The successes were from my point of view, and I made it clear in my write-up. I defined success in this project as contributions to better communication between stages, increased transparency, and increased public access to the collections. I only highlighted issues at each stage that would affect other stages of the project because I'm focusing on the system as a whole and making the flow of objects as smooth as possible from stage to stage. The opportunities of improvement focus on the same aspect the successes did. So improved communication, increased transparency, and increased public access. I also identified challenges that affected the entire system, meaning similar issues that multiple stages experienced. For example, almost each stage described an issue of balance. The acquisition stage has to balance the variety of subject matter acquired. The accessioning stage has to balance time spent, accessioning each object, et cetera, throughout the whole system. Each stage has its own balance. And I was very careful in my writing to simply point out issues and plainly state areas for improvement so that nothing felt accusatory. Everybody I interviewed was very passionate about their work and wants to do better. And with this project, I wanted to provide some specific directions for improvement and hopefully result in a smoother flow of objects through the special collections at UD. Now, given the time frame of 1 semester for this independent study, I had to focus on a good stopping point, which means I did not get to take the project as far as I wanted to. If I had more time, I would have modeled some of the bottlenecks in the system to illustrate what it would look like. I had these grand ideas of animating small dots flowing through the system and illustrating where bottlenecks occur and how that affects the flow at other stages. I also would have dived deeper into systems theory and different model types to fine tune the infographic, because while grounded in the concept of thinking about special collections as a system, I wanted to become more familiar with systems theory literature in order to learn effective ways of representing a system and effective ways of communicating system problems and resolutions. Of course, I did the best I could with the time and energy that I had, but just wanted to acknowledge potential improvements I did not have the time and energy for. So that concludes my presentation, and we're going to start the Q&A section, but I just want to say that I also welcome any suggestions if anyone has any in terms of further research for this project. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, both of you. And if you are attending and you have questions for our speakers, feel free to throw them in the chat or the Q&A box. Vanessa Chen has a question for you, Deanna. How does your team find and select people to collect oral histories from?
Thank you for the question. Well, I conduct the genealogical research for the people buried at San Jose. And from there, I track living descendants, and I reach out to them and we schedule the oral history interviews. However, that's kind of how we started. But because of the local press that we've been getting, a lot of descendants are starting to come forward and reach out to us themselves. And so we've been able to obtain oral history interviews that way as well.
As people are reaching out to you directly, are you coming up with a system to prioritize the interviews? Is it based on age or location, or is it you're just figuring it out as you go?
It's whoever reaches out to us. We schedule the interviews as the descendants reach out, and it's been great. They email us, or some people just email. We've been getting a lot of emails from descendants that haven't been able to locate their loved ones. And so that's been another really empowering part of this work, is we get to help people find their loved ones that they haven't been able to track down.
Wonderful. Nyla, so as you have been working through this system, it seems like you're really working to get people out of their departmental silos and figure out the best ways we can have the general public access the information and the objects and stories that are held within an institution. As you've been exploring these processes, have you found any what have been some of the major roadblocks for, that you've found as you've been trying to create the most efficient flow chart to getting the objects, in the public?
I think time ends up being a big factor, because, there's, I didn't ask the interviewees about this, but I think there's probably a discrepancy between what your job description says you're supposed to do and then what you actually end up doing. And I think You know, the UD Special Collections has recently done a lot in terms of trying to get interdepartmental communication and stuff like that. And I think that like just the time for those meetings plus the time to like keep up with all of your like normal job work can be a lot. And so you kind of have to balance the two.
But in theory, if you make the time, you make the work easier, right?
In theory, I think so. I think part of it is just because there's a lot of objects, right? And so they end up being sort of bottlenecked at the sort of accessioning and processing stages, just because they would literally have to go through everything. And so it's easier to like acquire something and be like, oh, we did it, we got it. And of course, you know, making that purchase and everything takes time, but then like depending on how many pieces someone has to go through and process that and decide like in order to put them all in, and that takes a lot of time. And I think that's not something realized throughout the whole department, whole special collections. And so I think that's where some of the problems arise. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Dee, have you been able to talk or partner with Olivewood Cemetery, who's doing similar work in the area? Question from Susanna.
Is this the Olivewood Cemetery in Houston?
It just says Olivewood Cemetery, so I'll assume yes.
Okay. If it's the one in Houston, they actually just reached out to me a week ago. So it's so serendipitous that you asked. They are inviting us to collaborate with them. So we haven't met up yet, but that's in the works.
Wonderful. And can you just very briefly describe the Necropolis politic as a way that seems like it really created a way to connect multiple people working in cemeteries and sacred spaces?
Yeah, so we put together the Necropolis politic last year in the fall, and the fall of 2020, I believe. Yeah, and it was specifically put together to give space to people working on preserving sacred spaces within the BIPOC community, and it's one of our trademark Reclaiming Memories trademark symposia, because we have two. And that's where we convene to talk about all of our preservation projects. We'll be having the second one this fall, right around the time of Day of the Dead. So you can get more details about that event through our blog.
Thank you. So Nyla, I know I've asked about like how you talk to people who are within the organization and working within the organization. Did you also have the opportunity to talk to the audience or the intended public to learn more about which type of objects seem to be, or, you know, manuscripts or what have you, are in a higher demand of access? Like, would that impact your flowchart process?
I didn't have a chance to talk to the public, but I know that the registration department, which sort of handles that like public access, I believe that's what it's called. No, referencing, the referencing part of the flowchart. And so they have a lot of data that they have that they can sort of that they want to better sort of analyze and pull that kind of information out of. One of the things that I did point out in the system was that a lot of the stages are sort of driven by interest, right? And so that can be great, but also can be a problem if it's sort of like, you know, a self-providing loop where, oh, you attract people that are interested in this thing, and then only people interested in that thing know that this is where to go. And then you end up not sort of showcasing other great things that you might have. Yeah. So didn't get a chance to talk to the public, but there's definitely potential for that data analysis to happen.
That's great. We have a question from Ann Cuss. Dee, can you discuss ways geospatial collaboration and partners can thoughtfully incorporate oral histories into cataloging grave and burial sites?
Yes, actually, we are this semester, this fall, we're working with an augmented reality organization, and we're going to be incorporating oral history clips into, I guess, a digital, like it's going to be a digital map of the cemetery, and you'll be able to point your phone at a specific grave, and you'll have like an oral history clip pop up where you can listen to these oral history clips, just to kind of bring to life the people that are buried there, so that they're not just unmarked burials or just names. Like they were people. And so this is one of the ways that we're trying to recover this history.
Thank you. I really appreciate that both of you, you know, Dee, you're out there, you're collecting the oral histories, you're collecting the things that then go into the special collections. And then we have Nyla, who's thinking through how we do the best processes to make sure all departments know what exists, to make sure all, you know, these things can have access. But I think that, you know, what you just said is a great reminder that it's not just up to the institutional that holds the collection to find ways to utilize the materials. You know, a whole breadth of organizations can activate them in meaningful ways. So I would love for us to wrap up with just like some closing remarks, whatever you'd like to conclude with for the day. But I will go ahead and mention if anyone's interested in further exploring the topic of cemeteries, today at 3 o'clock Eastern time is a talk with Jennifer Blanks, and it's about the patterns of disproportionate multi-hazard risk and vulnerability in Louisiana's historic African American cemeteries. So we'll start with Nyla.
I just wanted to say thank you all for listening again. This was really interesting. I'm so glad I got to, you know, be a part of Deanna's presentation. I hope I'm saying that right. And just, yeah, thanks everybody.
Oh, thank you, Nyla. I just really wanted to have you here because I feel like a lot of us in the audience, like we're the researchers, we're the ones wanting to access the information in the collections. So I thought it was great for us to get a bit more of the behind the scenes on how collections are working to improve. And Dee?
I wanted to add that the ultimate goal is for the community to be able to upload stories themselves onto this digital platform for the burials that are at the cemetery. And I took I followed the model that the, what is it called? There's this specific organization, and I'm blanking out right now, but I'll put it in the chat. I followed their model for this digital platform. Heart Island Project, that's what it was. The Heart Island Project. They have a wonderful digital platform where you can click on the burials and these stories pop up. And so I thought that was a very empowering way to bring forth this history. And so that's kind of the model that I'm following. So I just wanted to say that this wasn't something that I just kind of conjured. Like I'm following the model that I saw with the Heart Island Project.
Thank you for sharing that, for giving us some homework. Thank you both for being here today and sharing your expertise. I truly appreciate it. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. Like I said, it was really important for this year to highlight the work of students and recent graduates. They've lost 18 plus months of networking. So, you know, connect with our speakers that you're learning about, reach out and find out more about their work. You know, this is inspiring work to help us reconsider our systems and the way we communicate, preservation, and do the work. So thank you everyone for being here, and we'll see you shortly, hopefully 2 p.m. Eastern, for a talk on preserving the Illinois Black Panther Party. And Dee, before I shut down quickly, people want your email.